And so after a few months of that happening, my parents sent me to see a therapist. And that was when years later as a teenager, I asked like, "Hey, did you ever tell did you ever tell that therapist that you were an alcoholic and that you and dad fought all the time?" And her answer was no, it didn't seem relevant.
Welcome. I'm Andy Carlson, and you're listening to the Time with Tim podcast. Each episode, we explore the impact of complex trauma through the personal journeys of our guests. Along the way, we'll connect with experts and individuals who share their unique perspectives, insights, and practical tools to help you on your healing journey. Andrea is the host of the Adult Child Podcast, a show that's raw, real, and deeply honest about what it means to grow up in dysfunction and find your way into healing. She's also the founder of The Shit Show, a growing online community for adult children and trauma survivors committed to recovery. Using humor, grit, and honesty, she's become a powerful voice in the trauma space. In today's conversation, we'll explore Andrea's childhood story, how she came to identify as an adult child, and what it really takes to move beyond survival. Andrea, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly.
It's in my mind every single time. Uh, so to start us off, we'd love to hear a bit about your early story. And I know in the past you've spoken about growing up in an alcoholic home and how you're labeled the problem child from a young age. And so could you maybe walk us through what that childhood looked like for you?
Yeah. So I think basically I always knew that my childhood was less than ideal. I did not consider it to be traumatic, though. I knew that others had experienced a lot worse than I did. You know, I was never sexually or physically abused. All of my needs and wants were always accounted for. You know, we went on nice vacations. We went to church on Sundays. And while I knew that there was, alcoholism present, and then I became kind of the focus of the family from the ages of 12 to 19, I thought that because of the reasons I just listed, that it wasn't that bad. I thought that because I could talk about it without getting that upset about it, I really did not think that it had impacted me that severely. And so, it was 9 years sober and 9 years of toxic romantic relationships and not being able to understand why I kept finding myself in these relationships. And, I really want to talk about the moment that I made the connection to childhood, and then I'll go back there. I had dated a guy for less than a month when he ghosted me, and he was an alcoholic, of course. And my reaction was as if my husband of 30 years had just tragically died in a plane crash. And I was inconsolable. My mom had to come out and help take care of me, and she was, in active alcoholism at the time. That's how, upset I was. And it was through that pain that I had two of the most profound ahas that I've had in my entire life. And one was, there's no way that the reaction I'm having right now could actually be about this person. And the second aha was, this is a feeling that I felt often as a child. This is a feeling that I felt as a little girl when I'd wake up in the middle of the night and felt like I was going to die if I couldn't sleep in my mom's bed. And so that's when I made the connection that this was rooted in childhood. And it wouldn't be until about 2 years later that I really would realize just how, I guess, number one, how serious this is. And number two, that this was just as serious, if not more serious than my alcoholism, which I'd always known that alcohol was just a symptom, but I didn't realize that alcoholism was just a symptom. So to back up, when I was 7 or 8 years old, we were out to dinner one night, and I'm an only child, and we were waiting for my dad to get there. I was with my mom, and my mom had a beer, and she was barely drinking it, and she was upset. And my dad eventually arrived, and at a certain point, my mom took me to the bathroom, and I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "I'm an alcoholic." And of course, I don't know what that means. And I'm just like, what does that mean? And she made a comment like, it means that I can't drink or something like that. And even though I had no idea what that actually meant, there was a part of me that knew exactly what it meant for some
Mm.
reason. And it's like I went to bed that night and I feel like I woke up the next morning having skipped several stages of development. And it felt like I developed this sixth sense when it came to my mom's drinking, and I could feel it hours before, she would even pick up a drink. And she was a periodic drinker, more of a binge drinker. And my dad traveled often for work. And that's when she would, be there to, that's when she drank the most. And so she would be there to pick me up, from school to swim practice. I mean, she'd drive me around drunk, but she'd always feed me, put me to bed. And then when my dad was in town, I was his emotional support and confidant. My mom's alcoholism was a secret from the rest of the world. And so he used me to talk about it. And, at the age of 8 years old, he's having me help him search the house for her booze, going into the liquor cabinet and using a paint stick to like measure and monitor each of the levels, as if that's really going to do anything anyways, right? And so, and then there was fighting, and it was either about my mom's drinking or it was about money. And I would just sit on the steps as a little kid, and I was like a moth to a flame. And I really feel like my first addiction was to the chaos and dysfunction in the family. Like I would get an adrenaline rush from it. Some kids might hide, want to cover their ears. I needed to hear every single word that was being said. And I remember even times where I would, if I anticipated that something was going to happen, whether my mom drinking or my parents getting into a fight, and something not happen, I remember actually there being somewhat of a letdown there. Um, and so one time when I was 9 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night, and when my dad was out of town, my mom, I would go and when I'd wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I'd go and sleep in my mom's bed for the rest of the night. And it was kind of like a fun thing to do. And there was one night in particular where I woke up to go in there and all the lights were on and the bed was still made and she had passed out downstairs. And so I had to go down there and carry her upstairs. And then that became a regular occurrence. And so then there was one evening where my dad was in town, and for some reason I woke up in the middle of the night and I felt like I was going to die if I couldn't sleep in my mom's bed. And I just went absolutely nuts. And it was back and forth to my room. And then finally my parents threw in the towel and my dad went and slept in my bed and I slept in their bed. And then that started this pattern where that's what would happen every single night, is that I would fall asleep in my bed. In the middle of the night, I would go and change places with my dad. And so after a few months of that happening, my parents sent me to see a therapist. And that was when years later as a teenager, I asked like, hey, did you ever tell that therapist that you were an alcoholic and that you and dad fought all the time? And her answer was no, it didn't seem relevant. And so that's when I became the identified patient of the family. And eventually I would, I started sleeping in my own bed at night. I couldn't sleep over at a friend's house until the sixth grade. And then in the sixth grade is when I started to, act out with drugs and alcohol. And seventh grade was a tough year. I became deemed the school slut and became the girl that nobody was allowed to be friends with. I eventually got kicked out of that private school that I went to. I think that those experiences had just as much of an impact on me as did my upbringing. I really feel like that is when that toxic shame was just cemented into me. And as, I'm sure Tim knows, and maybe you too, Andy, is, where John Bradshaw talks about that, the shameless acting in, or the shameful acting out, or the shameless acting in, where a kid, when shame becomes a kid's identity, they go one of two routes, one of which being, I'm gonna try to be perfect and I'm going to avoid any sort of future shaming incidents, or you lean into the shame and act accordingly. And that's definitely the route that I took. And it really just became my mission to be under the influence as much as I possibly could. In the 8th grade, I got sent to rehab for the first time. It was 4 days after my 14th birthday. And from, 12 to before I finally got sober at 19, it was just in and out of rehabs and boarding schools. And, I would say I really crossed the, as they say, like when the pickle analogy, right? Like when an alcoholic, when a cucumber becomes a pickle, I would say I really crossed that line around 16. That's when I became a daily drinker. And the other thing about that too is that I am awful. Like I am an awful drunk. Like I am so obnoxious and annoying and you don't want to be around me. And I wonder, like, is that just my nature under the influence, or did part of that have to do with the fact that, as I said, I was the girl with no friends? And so I don't know if it was almost like a protective mechanisms of like, I know that you're not going to like me. And so I'm not even going to give you that opportunity to decide that you don't like me. I'm going to act this way anyway. So and I really do feel like that played a large role in being able to I think one, it fueled my alcoholism even more because I was so isolated. And, and so that isolation and the inability to have friends, I think, is really what helped to get me sober because it was such a miserable experience. But the thing that I want to know is that, me acting out in that way, like that worked in fixing the family. Like my mom stopped drinking as much or very little. I have very few memories of her actually drinking during those years. And my parents stopped fighting as much. And, it was, their focus was on me. They had to come together to deal with me and to focus on me. And it's really interesting to think about that. But then once I got sober, unfortunately, it's been just a downward spiral for the both of them. And hopefully we can touch upon that at some point. It's really bad. And I really feel like my mom's dying. She's not doing really well right now at all. So I'll just pause there.
So can I just speak to that right
Please.
now, Andrea? So typically to me, what happens, so in the family of your mom and dad, with you as the child, so mom's the alcoholic, dad's kind of the enabler, but they're fighting and they're arguing, but dad's not willing to take a stand and set boundaries and say, I'm out of here with Andrea. If you're going to keep drinking, he's just going to continue and try to manage the mess. But he's becoming, I think there's probably a huge amount of codependency. He's addicted to your mom. He's afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being alone. So they kind of have this sick need of each other that keeps them kind of in this very chaotic, avoidant, anxious attachment type of relationship. So what happens when the child becomes the problem is everybody's got a new drug. Everybody's got something now that absorbs their attention, that they can focus on, that gives them energy, that gives them motivation. And so actually you become their drug until you're past that. And so to me, the reality is this, like you say, addiction's a symptom of deeper issues. And so mom stopped drinking, but she didn't deal with the underlying issues. She just switched the medication from the alcohol to you, and that enabled her to stop drinking, but the underlying issues were still there. So as soon as you're on your feet and doing well, all the underlying issues start coming up. And now what does she use to cope with them? If she's not really going to deal with the deep issues, you slide back into the medicating through alcohol. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Another thing that's really interesting too is that I guess, and this might have even been before I found out my mom was an alcoholic. I think I was pretty young, but my dad reached out to her parents to say that, she had a problem, and they totally dismissed him. And I often wonder, like, what would have happened had that not happened, Probably
Eh,
nothing different, but who knows?
Well, yeah, and to me, and you know this very well, as part of families where there's addiction is denial has to, it's not just within the person
Yeah.
who's the addict, it's within the family structure. So we got to keep the secret. We can't talk about this, the elephant in the room that nobody's going to talk about. And then extended family, they're going to deny the problem. And so that just feeds the problem over and over again. Can I just go to kind of you as that child? Like to me, there's, okay, so I'm going to do a bit of an overview here and lead into my question. So to me, adult children within an alcoholic family, really what's to me two very helpful things have come out of the research, and that is typically there's emotionally immature parents that you have as your parents. So you end up as the child having to be the parent to your parents. And that puts a tremendous amount of stress and responsibility on you. And it feels good in a way that dad's confiding in me, that mom needs me, mom can't sleep without me, I got to help keep mom sober. That feels good, but yet there's an anger that develops because your needs are being neglected. You're not feeling valued for who you are. And then the second piece to me is that in many alcoholic families, the physical needs of the children were met very well. That's not the issue. The issue is that their key emotional needs weren't met. And so I'm hearing some of that in your story is very much physical needs met very well, emotional needs not so much. And then what your initial kind of medication of all that internal pain was the chaos gave you adrenaline. Then you didn't feel your own emptiness and pain. But once you're starting to act out a little bit and get rejected and called a slut and all of those things, to me, I see just a building anger inside of you. So you got anger and pain that are building, where it just reached this tipping point, and it's like, screw everybody, I'm done. I'm going to take care of me now. So does that make sense? Can you speak to, so I guess to me, speak to kind of the emotionally immature parents, the emotional needs not met in you, and then the building emotional world of little Andrea as she was in this situation?
So it's really interesting because I want to touch upon the relationship with my mom in that she was the most amazing mom, like 90% of the time, 90% of the time. And you know what? Our family was like, that's what's been, and we can touch upon this later, but that's what's been really hard of, to not just to grieve what once was, to have a family where, things seemed like not that bad, but to where, I look at the members of my community who had much more horrendous upbringings and never felt loved and were never told that they were loved, or had parents who weren't invested or cared at all. And that was not the case with my parents at all. They were very invested in me. They were always at, the school events. I do feel like they loved me. And, but with my mom, she was my person, like I felt a lot of, comfort and safety in her. The one connection that I've made recently is that the lack of repair, the not acknowledging what had happened. And I look at what I tolerated in romantic relationships and drawing that specifically there to somebody who I felt loved me very much and treated me so well, and then would just disappear completely abandoned me. And then just the lack of acknowledgement there, the lack of repair there. So the emotional immaturity, yeah, it's like I never would have considered that, because they did seem so mature in many respects, or had their quote unquote shit together. But the fact that, it was never, no one was ever checking in with me.
Exactly.
No one was ever checking in with me. And I still like experience that with my dad too. It's, well, think about what I'm going through. And so there was, and also just the reaction to my, which were totally appropriate reaction, my, the separation anxiety, but to where that was treated as, what was wrong with me was that there was something wrong with me, as opposed to me being a symptom of my experiences, or me sounding an alarm on what was going on. And so it's I was just taught really early on to just completely disregard my emotions. And there's one experience that I think with my mom too that taught me was, there was a girl in the first grade. Her name was Courtney. And every day I would walk into class, and I never knew if today was going to be a day where she wanted to be my friend, or if she was going to be so mean to me that I would just get into the car at the end of the day and just cry hysterically. And I would have play dates with her. And the next day she would be so mean to me. And my mom would call her mom and, try to fix things or resolve things. But I wonder, like, why didn't my mom tell me? And I don't know if it's normal for a kid, but it's like, why was I was just willing to just take whatever it is that I got. If she wanted to be nice to me that day, then that was great. If she wanted to treat me horribly, well, then that's fine too, because if you like me tomorrow, I'll take it, And I just wonder, like, my mom was my mom. Why didn't my mom say, you can't hang out with her anymore? She's treating you horribly,
Exactly.
So it was like those sort of messages that were there. But I did feel like such a grown up. And I'm 5'11", and I was really tall. I say, thank God I started smoking at 12, or I would have been 7'1". So there was also this part of me that was treated a lot older because I looked older as well. And so, I just wanted to grow up so fast. And where am I going with all of this?
So the emotional immaturity of parents, and then your needs not being
met. Yeah. It just, the thing is that it just showed up in, this stuff really showed up the most for me in romantic relationships, but just completely losing myself. And I was not taught at all how to meet my emotional needs at all. I don't even think I knew what they were, or that I had them. And
so can I just speak to
mm-hmm.
that, Andrea? Because I just want to highlight that what you're saying, I think, is so bang on. So to me, when your dad comes home and you're listening to him share about mom, it's all about his needs. When mom's drunk and you gotta go to bed to keep her kind of safe, it's all about her. So you're being trained very early to put your needs down, mm-hmm. and maximize the needs of those close to you, which is really setting up a relationship template that when you get to adult life, you just find guys that you know how to do that. You put your needs down, you maximize their needs. That's how you do relationships. And you're not even really aware of what your needs are. You're just very aware of what their needs are. And away you go, and then find out this isn't working. And you've got big problems as a result of it. But there's another piece that I just want to highlight here. I've had so many people come to me like your story and say, but my family, it's not like my parents were evil. My parents were actually really good. Like 90% of the time, they were wonderful parents. And I go, this is not an all or nothing thing. This is not you're the total devil or you're Jesus. This is, we're all a mix of good and bad and all of that. The key thing to me is in understanding trauma is to understand the little t trauma. It's that invisible trauma that doesn't seem that significant, that nobody else is going, like everybody else's life is way worse than mine. How could I think mine is a bad life in comparison? And so it's all that little wee stuff. And so in your situation, what I'm hearing is, and I've had so many clients like this as well, that mom is great 95% of the time, but once in a while mom gets triggered. And when she does, she goes ballistic. She's mad at the world. She says hurtful things. She calls us down, calls us names. She's extremely disrespectful. She lashes out. She just wants to hurt everybody. She's extremely angry. And then she's the next day sorry for it, blah, blah, blah. But she doesn't repair it. She doesn't totally own it. She's still trying to blame everybody else. So it's never getting totally repaired. And so I go, okay, 95% of the time, wonderful mom. 5%, mom becomes this different person that's just kind of this evil force. Which messages do you remember the most? And it's in those moments. And that's where, to a child especially, when they're not able to process all of that with anybody, they're personalizing that, what's going on. And so to me, if mom's great all the time, but then you're picking up, your gut's picking up, there's tension in the house between mom and dad, mom's going to drink. All of a sudden there's an insecurity that you're living with where it looks like things are great, but yet your vagus nerve is picking up danger. Lack of consistency, lack of predictability, lack of security, because mom and dad fighting, mom drinking, those two things are causing me to now all of a sudden live in this insecurity that's growing. And then the 95% of the time can't compensate for that.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think in many respects, and this is totally, it's played out in my healing, in my adulthood too. You know, when it's in certain ways, when it's good 95% of the time, sometimes it ends up being a lot worse. Like the impact of it is very, very insidious, very, very insidious, and very, very, very toxic. And it can be a lot harder to spot. It can be a lot harder to heal because it is not top of mind. It is very, very deeply ingrained. And, you know, what I'll say is that, you know, money also was this big, you know, topic and theme. And I think that also too, because of them not being as bad, that it has kept me hooked into them more in adulthood. You know, like I think it's a lot different when your parents are so awful, and it's not a negotiable to set up, you know, go no contact with them because of who my parents had been at times. I feel like it has allowed there to continue to be this hook. It's almost like these invisible snake viper venoms, you know, in me that has ultimately caused there to be more harm and damage in adulthood because of that. Because at one point in time, you know, they were a lot more loving, or 95% of the time good people, you know? So I think that it can, in many ways, it can be a lot more, not a lot more, but destructive in different ways. And the impact can be pretty horrible.
Can I just pursue it two different directions here?
Please, you can do whatever you want.
So the first thing that I'm hearing, and to me it's very, very common, but little Andrea is sitting there thinking, what can I do to help? Mom and dad's relationship, mom's drinking. I got to be able to improve the situation if I just try this, if I just do this. So you put more and more responsibility on yourself to fix mom and dad's problems, which then you tend to carry into adult relationships with men, etc. It's 80% on me to make this work, and they don't have to own their stuff or change. I should be able to figure out a way to change them and to make this relationship work. How much do you see that in yourself as a young child?
I don't know how much it showed up in other areas other than with my parents. Getting involved in fights with, like, getting in the middle, trying to stop their fights. But as far as with other kids, I'm not quite sure. Well, I found my first boyfriend when I had my first serious boyfriend when I was I guess in the 9th grade is when I was with him. And he had a lot of problems. And I definitely found myself kind of people pleasing and acquiescing there too. Another thing that happened with him was that really showed up in my romantic relationships too, is he ended up getting sent away to a boarding school in the middle of the night. He had the whole thing happen to where the two guys come in the middle of the night, and he had been my entire world. Like, I didn't have any other friends. And so I woke up one morning and he was gone. And there was just a series of events in my childhood, starting with my mom, who would disappear when she would become under the influence, to where I was it was just dropped out from underneath me, where I would just get abandoned without any sort of warning. I think that the way that it showed up the most for me was just I don't know how much of a fixer I really was. It was more so in just this belief that I am just inherently flawed.
Okay.
That there's just something wrong with me.
The shame belief.
Like, if something happens with a friend, it's because of, it was always just waiting for people to finally see me for who I really was and to realize that I just suck.
Yeah.
But none of it was conscious.
Yep, exactly. And that's key for people to understand. What I see with you, which is quite an interesting dynamic as I look at it, is, to me, you experienced inconsistent, intermittent connection. So you would have times of connection with mom, and then mom would abandon you. And then there'd be no connection. And so that, to me, is some of the worst type of connection or attachment based stuff for kids to go through, because you get your hopes up, this feels good, mom's my person, then mom's gone, and what just happened to my world, and then your young brain, must be me, I guess I'm the problem, and then that gets carried over into all your thinking about relationships and being abandoned.
I had a horrible relationship with my dad, except for when my mom was under the influence.
So you needed a crisis to bring you together to produce attachment. Yeah.
Yeah. The only time that he was available to me was when my mom was unavailable to him.
Yeah. So again, very interesting dynamic. Sadly, it's way more common than people realize, that if you can't connect in a good way, but if something is in crisis mode and then they want to connect, well, that's better than nothing. So let's keep creating crisis, because that at least leads to connection. Okay, another piece I wanted to just explore briefly, and that is, so what I'm hearing from you is just, as a young child, not a lot of awareness of your needs, your emotions happening within your family system. Now, not always, but in many cases, that comes because of either image issues or cultural things. Like, we don't talk about feelings in our culture. We just look good. We're successful. Everybody respects us because we make good money. We're important in the church and our jobs, blah, 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 in the community. And so we got to maintain an appearance. Therefore, we can't be authentic. We can't be genuine because then people might think less of us. Any of that apply to you?
100%. And the real kicker is that didn't apply to me.
Exactly. You were very authentic through it all.
Well, no, I mean that keeping up this image.
Oh, okay.
So there was, of course, my mom's alcoholism was a secret. But one day I walked into fourth grade and somebody comes up to me and said, CJ told us that you sleep in your mom's bed every night. And my dad had played tennis with CJ's dad the night before, the day before. And so, yes, it was very much keeping up with an appearance, and still is today. It still is today. It's, and that's been a struggle with, especially with my dad. But it's, we give half of our money away to charity. We do this, and I'm not sure how much of it is completely inauthentic. But there's definitely an aspect of it that is. And so there was just, and it wasn't verbalized, but especially with like me getting kicked out of the private school that I went to, there definitely was I would call it an atmospheric shame, that I felt directed at me.
Now, are there any religious overtones in all of that?
I mean, yes, we were, but not super strong.
Okay.
No.
Okay. I just wondered when they were giving so much money to charity, whether there was very much.
That's part of it, but
Yeah.
it's not, I would say that I think it's for my dad to make a bargain with God.
Okay. So there's a spiritual component there. Okay.
Yes.
So that's often a shame, false guilt type of version of Christianity. Okay. So take us a bit further then, like what I see all the time with people that come out of adult children situations is they do what you do and they get into adult relationships that repeat the patterns of their childhood that they vowed never to get into and they end up doing. And so the first, basically what I see all the time is they blame the other person that they're screwed up. If they could change the other person, the relationship would be good. Or they blame something else, that it's the fault of their family, it's the fault of whatever, not getting enough support, etc. It takes a while before they realize that I'm part of the problem. It takes two to tango. And unless I work on me, I'm going to keep repeating these patterns. Mm-hmm. When was that turning point for you?
Well, so I get sober at 19, and I think that this is so important for us to touch upon, right? Because we think that just getting sober and like working the steps is going to suffice. And I definitely thought that that was going to be it, right? And so, I get sober, and everybody has a broken picker when they get sober, right? Like nobody's coming in with a track record of, healthy relationships. And mind you, I'm 19 years old too. But so I had a broken picker, but so did everybody else. And I saw other people's pickers slowly improve, and mine was not. And not only was it not improving, the way that I acted in each relationship was getting worse as far as the way that I felt. And I had no idea that what I was experiencing was complex PTSD. Like I had no clue that that's what was going on. And most of my relationships were pretty short-lived. But as soon, and it would probably only take, like a date or two, but as soon as I would decide that I liked this person, I became completely hijacked by the relationship, and I became completely non-functional, especially if I wasn't hearing from them, like horrible anxious attachment, and had no idea that that I was in the midst of emotional flashbacks, I felt so much shame about it. And I became such an emotional vampire with my friends, and I was somebody who I wouldn't hop from one relationship to the next. Like I would have significant periods of time, partially because it would take me so long to get over this person. So I think that's interesting. It would be like, it would take me like 6 times the length of a relationship to like get over the person, But I would have significant periods of time off in between, and I would be feeling really good about myself, and my self-esteem would be high, and mind you, I'm doing all the things. I'm going to meetings. I'm working the steps. I'm sponsoring other people. I have service commitments. I'm doing all these, and I go into the next relationship and I'd be confident that I was not going to do the same thing over again. I'm confident that I'm not going to ignore red flags. I'm confident that I'm not going to lose myself. And without fail, every single time it would happen. And I couldn't figure out what the heck was wrong with me. And nobody was saying anything to me about it. Nobody was saying anything to me about it. I went to a therapist at 4 years sober finally. She didn't tell me that it was trauma, she didn't point out that it was trauma. And so then I ended up, moving to San Francisco in 2014 when I had 5 years sober. But then it was the tale of two Brians that were, my aha and my realization of what was going on. And so I shared that story of being ghosted after 30 days. And so that was Brian number 1. And then so a couple months after I had that aha of like, this is a feeling that I felt often as a child, I went to an AA meeting, and a woman with over 30 years sober was sharing. And she was talking about how when she had 7 years, which is what I had at the time, that she had had a breakup that allowed her to hit this emotional bottom in which she came to terms with her childhood and that it impacted her a lot more than she thought it did. And she mentioned this term, adult children of alcoholics. So I go home and I read the book, and my mind is blown, like my mind is completely blown. I'm reading everything that I've thought, felt, and did that I thought that I was the only one that did. And I come back the next week and I go up to her after the meeting. I'm just, thank you so much for what you shared. I told her a little bit about what was going on with me. And she's like, Andrea, that's great. But I just want you to know that this is going to take you years and years and years to work through. And I'm thinking, years? I'm 28. I need yesterday. Like, how about a couple months? And she's like, you have to treat this as seriously as your alcoholism. And I didn't get it yet. Like I understood this was connected to childhood. I don't think I really had made the trauma connection yet. And I just thought, wow, I really hope her childhood must have been a lot more screwed up than mine, would be. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a year off from dating, and I've read this book, and surely that will be good enough. And so fast forward to Brian number 2, who turned out to be another alcoholic. And that was the most insane 6 months of my entire life. Like absolutely insane, acting in the same exact ways that I would have if I was under the influence, but it was also hard too, because it was like kind of one of the first relationships where this person, I had a pattern, and I think this stems from middle school, of any time I was with guys, they wanted to keep me completely compartmentalized. They didn't want to bring me around their friends. They didn't want to bring me around their family, and I think that a lot of that has to do with just being that girl that didn't have any friends. And so this was kind of like the first person that really brought me in and wanted to make me a part of their lives. And I mean, I was absolutely miserable, and I was a horrible employee. I was working, I was a CPA at the time, and I couldn't show up. I couldn't do my job, and I felt horrible about it, but I was just completely, my mind was, I was just constantly living in a trauma response and an emotional flashback. And so it was at the end of that relationship that I well, in the midst of it, really, that I was like, wow, this is really serious. Like, this is insane. Like, it was almost like observing it, like, while it was happening, and just seeing how hooked in I was and how impossible it was to finally walk away, and finally being able to do that. And that's when I realized that my life depended upon confronting this, you know? And I would say that the men that I typically was attracted to were, it was like a combination of my mom and my dad, you know? It was like the emotionally unavailable alcoholic. Um and so, yeah, and so it was at the end of that relationship, that was 2018, was when I was like, all right, it's like, it's time to do the damn thing. And then I found my therapist, who I saw twice a week for, the first probably 2 years. But I truly believe, I was divinely led, out there. Like, I was divinely led. I was supposed to date the Bryans, and I was supposed to move to San Francisco, and I was supposed to have my therapist. And I don't, I'm glad it all happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. But there's so many people that, and that's why I created this podcast, and we can get into more so about how I ended up making that leap. But as you know, there's so many people that are sober that don't realize that whatever the issues are, whether it's in romantic relationships or at work or whatever, in parenting, is a result of their trauma. And so that's why I was hoping to reach as many people as possible who might be in that boat.
Yeah, when I started in an addiction center, and I heard over and over again clients come in with alcoholism or drug addiction, and it's like, I just got to get clean and sober, and if I am, then that's going to fix everything, as if that was the only problem. And it's like, whoa, this is a symptom of deeper problems. Don't think this is the problem, that once you get sober, you're magically going to be fixed and be the perfect dad and the perfect husband and all of that. But they just had this fantasy in their mind that if they could stop the drinking, I was somehow going to fix everything. And like you, it took them several years before they finally realized, I think there's something else going on here besides, because I've been sober for 5 years and I still got a terribly messed up life. And to me, it just takes a while for people to get to that deeper honesty and awareness that there's more going on, and it stems from childhood stuff. So good for you.
What's your opinion as far as, like, I look at some of my friends who have never really necessarily had to go to this deeper level. And I would say in certain respects, maybe on the surface, their childhoods were more, typically your normal type of trauma or dysfunction. On the surface, it seems like like, why is it that some people seem as if that's all they need and they're good, and for others like me, their life depends upon doing deeper work?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So I'm going to give you my kind of take on it, and not everybody would fully agree with me, but to me, there's two things that come out of trauma and addiction. And so denial, we all know about. And so what people often think is, okay, I'm stopping denial because I admit I'm an alcoholic. So the denial's gone. What they don't realize is that they're only acknowledging one truth. They're still denying a whole bunch of other truths, which are, my childhood really messed me up. I don't know how to do relationships. I never had secure attachment. I don't know how to do secure attachment. I got fear of abandonment. I got huge shame issues. They don't want to go there. That's a can of worms they just don't want to open. So they think they're past denial, but they're even more entrenched in a deeper denial. To me, that's part one. Then part two is, most people coming out of complex trauma and addiction are always looking for the magic fix, the shortcut, the bypass of having to do hard work, sit in uncomfortable emotions, have a slow process of growth. I want a quick fix, instant, easy magic. And so sadly for many people is, they've misused the 12 steps to actually provide for them a bypass. I've done the 12 steps. There, I'm sober now. That's all I need to do. I just keep doing the 12 steps over and over again. And that keeps you very much outside of step 4 and 5, 6, and 7 around the moral inventory, but that gets very much a narrow focus that, okay, I've done all of that, so I've done deep work. Therefore, I can bypass all other deep work because I've done that. And so to me, there's been a misuse of the steps that's become a convenient bypass of having to do even deeper work. Does that make sense? And it's sad. And that's why, to me, you're still dealing with the same coping mechanisms that people had in childhood and in addiction. Denial, looking for quick fixes, magic fantasy solutions, which don't exist. But if you've got enough successes in your life, you got a good job, you're respected in the community, you can maintain a certain level of denial by saying, see, this proves I must be a pretty good person. It proves I must be healed. Meanwhile, those closest to them, their children and spouse or partner, are saying, no, you're a messed up puppy, but nobody else is going to tell you that. But we're telling you that, but you ignore it because everybody else is saying positive things about you. So that imbalance of kind of what's feeding them feedback, wife and kids versus everybody in the community, enables them to stay in this denial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you have a lot of people that end up going back out, and I believe that that's why I just had she was my best friend for 15 years. A year ago, she randomly told me she didn't want to be my friend anymore because I was toxic. The blessing, and that's one of the areas that I can just see so much growth, is that now when relationships end, not to say that I don't have a part, but I don't always automatically go because there's something inherently wrong with me. But I just found out that she's drinking again, after 15 years. And there was a lot of pushback when it came to me talking about the stuff that I, do. She just made comments about, I don't think everybody has this kind of stuff. And I'm like, I kind of think that everybody does.
So if I can just add a perspective and ask you to comment on it, Andrea. So to me, what comes out of complex trauma is the child says it must be my fault, so I'm bad. That's the shame lies that they believe about their identity and all of that you've talked about. So what happens for a lot of people is they try to compensate for that. So I hate feeling less than everybody, so I'm going to try to act superior to everybody. So I'll get the good image, I'll be a perfectionist, get straight A's, be highly productive, perfect body, lots of boyfriends, all of that kind of stuff. So it's almost their response to their shame is to become narcissistic. And then addiction actually feeds a narcissism because it's all about me getting the drug. Doesn't matter what you need or you want. It's all about my needs. So there's a narcissism that's built into addiction, but it often comes out of some of the complex trauma stuff that people have. What I've seen for many people in recovery is much of their recovery is initially fueled by shame and narcissism. I got to look good. I've been made to look bad. My image has been tarnished. So I have to compensate by getting sober, by being a good citizen again. So they haven't dealt with the underlying shame and narcissism. They've just redirected it to try to look healthy without dealing with really all of the issues. And so to me, that's what starts to trip them up again. Does that make sense? Do you see that in your experience with people?
So at what point, what do you mean by that starts to trip them up?
So to me, if a person hasn't dealt with shame, which they compensate for with narcissism, sooner or later, you can't have relationships that are healthy. If with
Yes.
that, you can't be a good parent with that. any attempts to have intimate relationships are going to break down because people are more to be used than to be loved. You've got hidden agendas that you're constantly working. So it just slowly begins to break down as far as their relationship world. And okay.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like, gosh, part of doing this work is like it makes relationships harder in the sense that people can't deal with the level of intimacy and realness that you want to go to, right? It almost makes your world even smaller. And I've found that my circle has gotten a lot smaller as I've continued to heal and grow, and especially with friends that I've had that were the people that I got sober with, that I've gotten to a certain level of depth and healing that makes other people extremely uncomfortable, extremely uncomfortable. And I think that in many respects, somebody like me is and gosh, and I'll own up to my stuff too. I mean, I'm a mess too, so I'm not trying to act like I'm some sort of saint, but I have the awareness of it, right? I'm aware of it, but I think that's a lot of what it is that it's a mirror, and it makes people feel really uncomfortable. And or another common theme that I've had is just, I think a lot of people in general, but especially people, with complex trauma is and I loved all of your series on conflict and repair, but just the inability to own up to mistakes, and so I've had several friendships over the past few years where people have literally just cut and run because they're not able to have that difficult conversation. They're not able to confront the shame of what they did when honestly, and I know that it has absolutely nothing to do with me, but I mean, I'll be so forgiving, I mess up all the time, but that's another common theme that I've seen is just people not able to own up to their mistakes because of the shame that it induces.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would say what you said earlier about it's almost like your world gets smaller as you go to deeper places of healing, that other people feel threatened or is more uncomfortable with you. That's, to me, very common. We hear that all the time. And what I want people to realize with that is there's certain friends that, are going to pull away from you but if you're doing the work, you're actually building new friends that are able to go to deeper places. So some of the more unhealthy friends are being replaced with actually better quality friendships. So there's a loss on one hand, but a gain on the other hand. That's kind of balancing that out. And the connection that you're experiencing with the new friends is actually more meaningful than the more surfacey connection that you had with the other friends. So you got to kind of go through this transition from kind of older set of friends to newer, more meaningful friends. And that's got an uncomfortable period. But if you get through that, it does get more rewarding.
Meaningful. Yes, absolutely.
So take us to kind of, well, before I want you to go to what kind of got you into doing the podcast and starting all your networks. But just let me say this as background. So when I started, complex trauma wasn't even on the radar yet within the general psychology world, let alone the addictions world. But when I started, adult children of alcoholics and adult children of dysfunction were the two terms that were used widely. So Janet Woytit's book was very common reading. And then just all the different people at that time that were trying to talk about adult children. But then that kind of went off the radar. I went for years where I really didn't hear much about adult children. Once we started to really start to understand, well, it went to developmental trauma disorder, and then it began to realize
What was that?
that would be probably 2007, 8 in there that we started hearing developmental trauma is the issue. And so to me, it really just took adult children of alcoholics, adult children with dysfunction, and just broadened it a bit further to say this is a developmental trauma issue. And it's part of a dysfunctional family system that's producing this developmental trauma. And then complex trauma came on the radar. And so adult children kind of fell off for a while. That I didn't hear about it until about 5-6 years ago. I started hearing about it again, and I was like, oh, people are starting to use the term adult children again. And it started with kind of children of emotionally mature parents, but then adult children started to be a term that was used again. And I'm glad it is, because I think it's just realizing that they're adults in one sense, but still children in another sense. They're adult children. There's this conundrum that they're living with internally based on their childhood. So I'm just, when I first met you, Andrea, it was just neat to see somebody that's kind of resurrecting this term and using it and helping people identify as that. And so kudos to you for doing that. I think my concern always with any type of title is that people get kind of narrow tunnel vision and they just start to think only in terms of that and don't have a broader perspective on stuff. But I think what I've seen in talking to you is you've really broadened your perspective as far as the trauma and all the different modalities of healing. But take us now to kind of what got you into this field.
So, as I said, I was a CPA. I was a accountant with a personality. They do exist. But part of hitting that bottom was the realization that I had never really considered what a fulfilling career would actually look like. You know, all I cared about was like finding a guy and getting married. And so I decided it's like time to do the damn thing. And by do the damn thing, I mean, figure out what am I supposed to be doing, you know? And I know that this is something that you talk about a lot, that it's one of the gifts of healing from complex trauma is really getting to live in our purpose and to really unearth the people that we're meant to be, you know? And so I really just embarked on this journey of figuring out what really makes me me. And what I realized was it's just this like unabashed vulnerability and authenticity. And a lot of it was rather profound interactions that I had with strangers where I would just meet them. And I mean, I'm an open book, right? And for some people it can freak them out, right? That's another thing I've had to learn, like in healing, is like, you know, kind of like the trauma dumping, but like, at least now I'm able to kind of gauge on when it's making somebody feel, because I'm not going to stop doing it, period. Because it's part of what makes me me, right? And I've had a lot of beautiful interactions from it, but at least now I've been able to gauge when I'm starting to weird somebody out, and I'll stop before I get there, right? But just these really meaningful interactions with strangers where I would just open up and they would just start opening up to me and just, you know, saying things like, you know, I've never really shared this with anybody, and I just met you 30 minutes ago. And I just want to share one story just because I feel like it kind of sums me up in a nutshell. And it was one of these just really powerful experiences where I just felt like I was continuously just being kind of divinely led. But so there was one day when I was on my way home, I was living in San Francisco. I was on my way home from work, and I was on the bus, and the bus was packed, and I'm sitting next to this guy. He's a black guy. He's probably like in his 50s, and he's wearing this like, you know, neon construction vest, and he's on his phone, and I can see he's on a dating app. I can see him. Well, obviously I'm looking at his phone, and I can see that he's on a dating app, and I can see that he's messaging back and forth with a woman, and she had just asked him like to describe himself or something. And so he's sitting there, you know, thinking of what to say. And I'm pretty sure I'm like the only person on the planet that would do this. I turned to him and I said, "I'm sorry, I can't help myself. What are you going to say?" And so he goes, "I'm going to tell her the truth." And he goes, "And this is the truth too. And he scrolled up to what he had said right before that. And what he had said to her was, before we go any further, I just want to let you know that in July of 2017, I got out of prison after serving 28 years. And so the first thing I said to him was, her response to you was so weird. Like, she made no note of that. Like, she didn't comment on that at all. And then the second thing I asked, which probably like nobody else would say to a stranger, I was just like, do you mind me asking? Like, was it for murder? And he said, yeah. And he started telling me that, you know, he grew up, his dad was an addict, or his mom was an addict, and his dad was in prison. You know, he joined a gang when he was 14. At 19 years old, he was, convicted of a double homicide. He didn't pull the trigger, but he had been the one to orchestrate it. And he was initially sentenced to the death penalty. And it was eventually overturned into a sentence. And he said that he knew at that moment that that his life had been saved for a reason. And so he got his GED. Then he became like a certified addiction counselor. And then after 28 years, he was released. And so we're just having this like really amazing interaction. And then we finally get to my bus stop and he gets off with me. And that's when he told me that his stop had actually been like several stops before, but he had stayed on to keep talking to me. And his name was Marvin. And I gave him a hug and we like became Facebook friends. And I just remember just buzzing with energy, like as I was, just walking home. And so that was an interaction where it wasn't necessarily about like the subject matter, but it was like just a lot of the time these interactions that I would have with strangers was about, either my childhood or, being in recovery. And so it was just like constantly, I felt like God was showing me, like, this is what makes you you, like, this is really what makes you special. And I ended up, my therapist had introduced me. I was thinking, do I want to go into the addictions field? Do I want to do this? And so I ended up, there was a guy that I knew that was doing sober coach. He did sober coaching and would do a sober transport. And he had somebody that wanted to do sober coaching that was going to a detox, but they wanted to do it more on the adult child lens. And he knew that's like kind of what I had done a lot of healing work in. And so he reached out to me and asked if I would go and, work with this woman. Well, if I ever relapse, I'm going to this detox. Okay. It was in Marin County. It was like just this beautiful house with a pool with the most amazing chef. And so I would go up there and I would sit with her by the pool and we'd read the adult child book and talk. And then one day I'm just driving home and I was literally driving over the Golden Gate Bridge and Tom Petty running down a dream was on my car on the radio. And it just popped up. Like it just popped in my head. I'm like, we need to do a podcast. Like, let's do a podcast about this. And I had tried to do these creative, projects, and I could never bring anything to the finish line. And so I just started working on it. And initially I hired somebody to help me, with the outlines, because I just thought if I don't hire somebody to help me with this, I'm never going to do it. And after working with them for a few weeks, I ended up just doing it myself. But, I'm still working. I'm just working on the side. And so, I just spent a little while just and I thought maybe I'll do 8 to 10 episodes. I was just going to go through my story and interview people and just kind of explain what this term is, adult child. And I will just say, so, the term is adult children of alcoholic and dysfunctional families. The definition that I give, so the definition in the the main text is somebody who responds to life with self-doubt, self-blame, or a sense of being wrong or inferior. The definition that I give is somebody whose unresolved childhood pain is surfacing and playing out in adulthood and not in a good way. And a lot of people think that this term just applies to people that grew up in an alcoholic family, but it applies to all different breeds of dysfunction. But so, yeah, I literally just recorded this on the floor of my closet next to my cat's litter box. I had no prior experience. And the whole time leading up to it, I really felt like big things were coming. Like I could feel it, but I was also scared to death and didn't want to lean into it because I was afraid that I was going to be disappointed, And so, yeah. And then, the other thing too was like, how much do I share about my family? How much do I go there? And I thought a lot about it, And my mom eventually found out that I was going to do this podcast, and she said to me, can you keep me and dad out of it? And I'm like, well, I've thought a lot about this. And I said, I am going to talk. And mind you, things were not, things were kind of things weren't as messy as they are now, but I mean, they still weren't great. And that's the other thing that we need to talk about too. But let me just finish the story as far as like, once I really started focusing on healing from my childhood, and it was less about, my alcoholism recovery, and it was more about this recovery, like my parents completely, becoming abusive and toxic towards me. But I told her, I said, I've thought about this a lot, and, I'm going to make sure that I emphasize that a loving family and a dysfunctional family are not mutually exclusive, and that, the dysfunction didn't start with you. And so I launched it, and it was like 3 months later, like I got asked to be on Dr. Drew's podcast, and it just took off really, really fast, and it was going great. But mind you, I was also working, but not being a good employee. And then I ended up getting fired from that job, which is like and I think it's partially because of the ADHD or just trauma that I hadn't yet healed. It's like, I'm the type of person that if I'm not into something, it doesn't matter how much I want to do a good job, I can't do it, and I wasn't doing a good job, and I would try to get myself to do a good job. And it was like, I'd go a few days and I couldn't do it. And it's like, I wasn't being the employee that they deserve to have. And I knew that. And so when I ended up getting fired, I wasn't yet in a position to where I was making enough money to support myself from it. But I knew that it was like the push off the ledge from the universe that I needed. And I was taken care of. It was like about a month later, one of my listeners reached out to me and said, I want to give you part of my father's inheritance. You've helped me so much. And then I ended up launching my community because unfortunately, a lot of the ACA meetings are kind of doom and gloom, They're not.
A lot of whining.
Yeah. They're kind of a little hopeless at times. And there's not that same level of being able to find humor in our stories that you can find in AA meetings, and just a lot of victimhood. And so it was hard to find quality meetings. And so I created my community more so because I needed to find my tribe, like I needed to find my people. And so it just kind of developed, I referred to myself as a shit show in one of the episodes, and then it just became the shit show. And I'm telling you, it is like it is next level vulnerability. And I think it's because of how vulnerable I am, but just the level of acceptance and non-judgment and what people are willing to share, they are willing to share stuff that I'm sure that they would be mortified or so embarrassed. And I'm not just talking about stuff in the past, I'm talking about stuff that they're doing in the present too, and so it has just been such a beautiful experience. And so it's raw and there's so much healing going on, but we're also able to laugh and have fun at times. So it's really been a wild experience. But what I will say is, I thought I was a lot more healed when I started this. I thought I was a lot further along. And so, I hit a rough patch, and I was about, I went through another dark night of the soul for about 18 months and, finally coming out of it about 5 months ago. But this stuff is hard, this is a lot of work. And so it's been quite a journey.
Well, thank you for that. Just 2 comments, and then I'm going to let Andy ask you a few questions. But to me, I think one of the biggest issues for many people coming into recovery is they think it's going to be easy and quick and fast. And once you realize how much work it takes and how slow the process is and how up and down the process is, that's a new layer of acceptance to accept the journey. And once people do, then that's when they can really make progress. But then the second thing to me is, I think we're all built with a longing for true connection, which means true authenticity, true vulnerability with safe people who aren't going to judge us, who hold space for us and accept us. And that's rare. That's hard to find. And people find bits and pieces of it, but nothing that really is super satisfying. And so I think for many people, they've had to go out and find their own tribe and create their own tribe and set kind of the parameters of this is what this tribe is going to look like and how it's going to function. And we're going to be authentic and vulnerable and real and raw. What I saw often in recovery is people could be very open and honest about their using drinking past or about their trauma. And so they thought they were super open and honest and vulnerable, but they weren't open and honest and vulnerable about any other parts of their life. It was just about that very narrow trauma or addiction piece. And it's like, no, we want all of you to be open and vulnerable. And so I think that's where I started seeing a difference on who did well in recovery and who didn't. The ones that were willing to become open and vulnerable in all areas and find the tribe that was willing to do that same and connect not just around trauma and around addiction, but to connect around life and total openness. Those are the people that grew and really healed well. So I'm just so thrilled to hear what you're doing. And we have many people that take our program that just say this is the first group they've ever found in their life where people can be raw and honest and be loved and accepted and feel safe. And the joy that they get from that is the first time they felt such an experience. So
Yeah, one of my dear friends who's in the community who he just went through the second, I think he just finished the second portion of your program. So he's been getting a ton out of it.
So Andy's asking about what you mentioned before, Andrea, that when you get, and it's, to me, it's very common with adult children, is you're great when you start a new job, a new project, you got tons of energy, it's exciting, you're learning, you're the best employee in the world until it becomes familiar, it becomes routine, then you get bored with it, then you just can't get motivated to continue doing it. So to me, there's a bunch of different factors with that. It's so common. And so there's an element that it's still a limbic brain child that's running the show. So I need life to be exciting in order for me to be engaged. If life is routine, then I'm bored, even though it's the healthiest thing in the world. I need an excitement level, and that can come out of complex trauma where I need a chaos level to feel alive. And so when something's new, I got adrenaline going, I'm high focus, high energy, then this is delivering back to me a reward that keeps me engaged. But as soon as I get proficient at it, then I start to lose interest. Mm-hmm. So that to me could be part one. Part two could be there's still a shame element that's underneath, that's got a fear of failure, a fear of success, a fear of being judged. And so as long as I'm high performance and very engaged, that's compensating. That's kind of trumping the whole fear of shame. But as soon as this starts to get familiar, that shame starts to become more and more part of my conscious world, and it starts to gain power. And so now my fears begin to take over. Then to me, a third piece for you, Andy, would be, I think a lot of people don't realize how much many people with complex trauma or adult children deal with underlying depression issues. There's just a deep, low-grade depression there all the time that can spike at times of the year, at certain holidays, winter months, whatever. And so if that happens to coincide with, I'm now getting used to this job and it's getting routine and boring, that actually feeds into the depression and takes away motivation even more. And so now you've got a whole bunch of different factors that are all sucking motivation out of you that I think are huge. And so to me, the bottom line that I want people to hear is that's going to happen. You can't control not making that happen because that's your limbic brain is being the limbic brain. All of your conditioning from childhood around shame and fear, they're all just doing their job, trying to protect you. So it's going to happen. The key is not to beat yourself up about that. the key is to get to your cortex, be curious about what's going on here, what is healthy, and I am going to continue to do what's healthy until I enjoy it again. Even though if I'm not enjoying it now, I'm going to continue to do it until I enjoy it again. Okay, so that leads to me one other piece, and that's, I think, what Andrea found. So many children coming out of complex trauma don't know who they are. They just learn how to fawn to survive. I will please you. I will be what you want me to be just so that you meet my needs and like me. And so they end up in jobs they don't even know if they're good at. They don't even know if they like. They just do it because they think that's what they should do. That's what others expect them to do. That's what they're told they'd be good at. And then they get there and they do it and they're great in the beginning, but then they go, this isn't, and it's not depression. It's not shame. It's not all limbic stuff. It's just a growing awareness that this isn't me.
Yeah, it's not the right fit.
Yeah, I need to figure out who I am and what feeds my soul and gives me life out of a job, because this one is soul sucking. And I'm going to basically die of boredom and burn myself out if I continue in this. And so that to me can be a very healthy shift internally that comes out of a growing awareness that this does not fit what I'm learning who I am. Okay, so Andy, I'm going to let you just
take it away, Andy.
Fire at Andrea, anything you got.
You can call me Andrea. I'm going to call you Andy.
Andrea. No. So I actually like where we were getting in the conversation, and I appreciate kind of like the authenticity with, the roller coaster of the healing journey. And so I have a few questions about maybe like where you are now from the past and kind of what you've done and maybe what you notice like different about yourself. And so you talked about the addiction to chaos and adrenaline. And so what I was wondering is like, what have you done for healing or grounding, or is that just something that you've adapted and incorporated into your life today?
It's so interesting. I just was sharing about this in my community. So we were talking about dissociation, and one of my favorite forms of dissociation is through like information addiction. And so, and it's not through light and fluffy stuff, right? It's murder trials, right? It's court cases and conspiracy theories. And so that makes you, I think we don't tend to think of hypervigilance being a form of dissociation, but it absolutely is. I think often we think about it as checking out or numbing out, but instead of like tuning into a threat, but it absolutely is. And so I have to be really mindful of that. And, it's an interesting balance though, because, and of course it is, right? Because as a little kid, that was, as I said, that was my first form of addiction, was like to the chaos and dysfunction in the home. It was listening to, I wasn't the kid that was going to their room trying to check out, through reading a book or, in fantasy land. I wanted to be involved and I wanted to hear every word. So it makes total sense that that's the way that I would want to numb out and check out now. However, the other aspect of that though is that I am a highly inquisitive person, and I'm very curious, and I am, I'm a truth seeker. And so a part of that is who I am, and it's aspects of myself that I really like about myself, And so it's like, I'm not going to completely cut that off, or say that that's, not an aspect of me and who I am. And so, for me, it's really about like finding a balance there. And, thankfully I am able to find a balance there. I mean, obviously if this was drugs and alcohol, that would be like a different story. Right. But, it really is about finding, having that curiosity and compassion for myself. And like, the reason I brought this up is because Monday was like it was not a good day for me. Like I was dissociating the whole day. I was checked out, and so it's not shaming myself when I do that, and not going to the place of like, what I'm doing is who I am, because I think that we can go there, like who I'm, the way that I'm behaving is who I am, and that's not true. And so that has been a huge step in of one area that I can see a ton of progress in myself is, and one is not shaming myself for when I have those bad days, and also two, not getting wrapped up into it to where I'm out for the count, like that I'm out for days and days and days and days. I'm able to like have a day and then we're back at it. But what I will say is that when I said, I had that, kind of a rough period for 18 months, is like I was literally living in functional freeze for 18 months, and I don't think I fully understood that that's really what I was living in. And I just made a series of videos on this, what I called the many faces of functional freeze, and the version of mine that I have is what I call like the shame and what did I call it? The stuck and shame-filled overthinker.
Yep.
And so mine is where it's the procrastination, it is the overthinking everything. It was the spinning out. It was I was able to show up and do my interviews and do the bare bones and the basics of running this podcast. But as far as like moving my life forward in other directions or doing other things, like completely incapable of doing so. Stuck on my phone, playing games. And then every night having that, at some point, that shame and that panic and that sense of impending doom hit you at some point during I'm never going to have the life that I want. I'm never going to be able to do this. You keep doing this over and over and over and over and over, day after day after day. And it is debilitating and horrible and awful. And I didn't realize, truly that this was like a form of freeze, and really it being my nervous system not feeling safe to move forward. And I'll say, when I said that, I wasn't as healed as I thought I was, like I really hadn't dove in as much into the somatic piece. And I think another part of it too is just everything that's been unraveling with my family has not helped at all. But breath work has been really huge for me. And, I really had a turn at the beginning of this year, and it's just been night and day. I'm so proud of the progress that I've been able to make. And I would say the biggest thing has been the somatic piece, and the breath work, but just being able to now have routines, a morning routine that I'm able to stick to. It's been now 5 months that I haven't had a dysregulation bomb go off in my apartment, because that was the other thing too. It was just like all of a sudden your place is clean, and all of a sudden it looks like literally a bomb went off, And so it's been months, 5 months of where I've really kept my place nice and clean and tidy. I've decorated the way that I want to. I've kept my car clean. I'm able to start cooking for myself again and really enjoying it. And so it's just like I'm able to now sit and watch TV and actually be engaged with a show and not have to be constantly on my phone. But I think it's also too, like, having the grace and compassion for myself that, like, that's what I had to go through, and like I was stuck in that for 18 months, and that's okay. Like that's where I was, and things have to unfold the way that they are. But boy, it's like I said, this healing journey it's messy, and it's not in our time always. Just a lot of deeper stuff that still needed to come up and is unearthing. But thank God it's coming out of it, feeling like myself again. So, and able to, like, there were tasks on my to-do list that had been on my to-do list for like 2 years, that I had been unable to do, that I'm knocking off. Like, just it just completely paralyzed and debilitated and unable to move forward. And so it's been a huge boost for my confidence to be able to kind of knock some of these things off. So I don't know if that helps. And I think that answers your question. So
Andy's our somatic guy and very much breathwork guy. So he definitely resonates with what you're saying a lot, but back to you, Andy.
Yeah, no, I love there's a lot of honoring yourself, honoring the truth of the messiness and the compassion. I was going to follow up asking with the breath work, like what type of breath work do you do? Is that something that you could describe or share?
Yeah, so I do this one, it's more of like an energizing type breath work that I do every morning, this one particular video, but I've done like emotional release breath work too, and we're actually about to start a course. A woman that's in my community is certified, so I'm calling it Breathe to Heal, so we're about to start doing that in a couple of weeks, but mostly just it's more of a 10-minute video that I do every morning, but just having that routine and doing it every morning has been huge for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I wanted
And
to
what
go
other
ahead.
somatic stuff do you do, Andrea?
So a lot of just check. I mean, I would say I've done a lot of it in combination with my parts work. That's also been a huge thing for me is finding an IFS therapist. That was the other thing that was I hadn't done. It was a way too much of a head up healing, you know. And so being able to finding my IFS therapist has been huge. And so I've been doing that since July. But I would say that I've had the most progress probably since it took me, I think, because I was in that functional freeze, because I am the person that goes that hypervigilant route, the overthinker. It took me a while to be able to kind of get through some of those other protectors and parts to actually start connecting with some of those other parts. And so that's been really profound. But I would say mostly it's the pause. It's the being able to stop and just feel what's in my body because it was always just in my head. So a lot of it is just somatic noticing and in the moment when I'm getting triggered. But the IFS has been life changing for me. And it seems like that's been the case for a lot of people in my community.
And he's a real IFS guy too. So
I do I actually do a very somatic form of parts work. I have aphantasia, and so a lot of IFS. I think if you can
What did you
visualize
say?
really well.
Aphantasia?
Aphantasia, so I don't have a if I close my eyes, I can't picture
Me
you.
too.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
Well, kind of. I mean, I have a really hard time visualizing things. Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I found IFS really works for people who can visualize well generally. And so like I've shifted to this very kind of body-based parts work, like a very somatic-based parts work.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not completely incapable of visualizing, but it's very difficult for me.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. Have you found any sort of reparenting? Are you doing reparenting with the parts work?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like, so at first I thought inner child stuff was so corny. Like I always knew that it was so important. And so it was probably it was maybe 3 years ago was when I was finally able to start crying. It took me a while before the tears would start to come up. And then once that happened, I feel like I leaned heavy into the reparenting route. So doing the Loving Parent Guidebook, which is one of the ACA books. And so connecting with my inner child, my inner teen, and a lot of reparenting work and in the moment. Um, but what I will say is that I feel like there was a place that I wasn't getting, that I wasn't able to, I was kind of getting blocked in my healing. And I think it's because of, when we think about certain like self-sabotaging behaviors and we think that we know whatever it is that it's protecting us from or whatever the root is of why we're doing it, and I don't think that I was getting there, because I think a lot of the times that this stuff is, it is from such a younger place that it's not rational. It's not something that necessarily that we would think of. And so it's really been through the parts work that I've been able to connect and actually get to what some of those deeper reasonings are, like what is it truly protecting me from. And so yes, from that and with unburdening, and I have my pictures of my girls and try my best to connect with them on a daily basis,
fantastic.
get them gifts, toys. We just went to Target last week. We got like what did we get? It was like a hamster. It was like a hamster cage, like a little fake hamster.
Those can be so good. I think just looking at
Hmm.
the time, I know you wanted to talk about your current situation with your parents. And so,
Well, I just think it's a common experience for people when they start doing this work for their family to turn on them. It's if you weren't the scapegoat before, you certainly become one when you're the only member of the family that chooses to seek healing. But there was a real shift in the way that my parents started to treat me when I said that I wanted to go to therapy to deal with my childhood. Um, and simultaneously, um, I would say both of my parents are alcoholics now. I would say that my dad probably became an alcoholic about 10 or 15 years ago. Um, but when I was 6 years sober was when I realized that there was nothing that I could do to get my mom sober. And I really think that I truly believed that at a certain point, um, eventually she will get sober because she loved me enough. I really did believe that. And when I realized at 6 years that there was nothing I could do, I knew on a conscious level that that had nothing to do with her not loving me enough. I don't think I really grieved that though. And I think that that's part of what came up for me, in this last little um, stunt. But basically, my parents have become like extremely, abusive, like towards me. And, part of it is that, they have been still helping me out financially. And I think that part of this also being stuck and unable to move forward is, there's a part of me that doesn't want to there is a part of me that doesn't want to let go. There's a part of me that feels like I'm protecting them or keeping them alive or safe if I'm staying a bit of a problem or like the failure to launch. I think that there's a part of me that's like the financial tie is the only thing that's left connecting me to them. And if I don't have that, then I don't have a family at all, you know? And so basically like what the pattern has been is that, anytime that I acknowledge the way in which their behavior impacts me, it immediately gets, turned back on me to where I'm entitled and ungrateful. And the lashing out, and the verbal abuse and the threats that they're going to cut me off and they're going to cut me out of the will. And, and then there's the part of me that feels the shame of that I've allowed myself to be kept in this situation, to where I am, to where I do depend upon them and need them. And yeah, it's finally last year was like the first time that my mom started to have physical, consequences of her drinking. And very, very little contact with them. But yeah, I think that my mom, something's going on, and she told me that she's down to 95 pounds. And I just really feel it in my heart that she's dying.
Right. Right.
Yep.
And
so it's been a lot of it is out of my like I'll say I am kind of numb and detached from it most of the time. But it's really hard. It's really hard.
So I'll try to speak into it a little bit,
Please.
Andrea, because to me there's many factors here that I think the most complicated relationship in the world is the one with your parents. And so you're trying to now untangle that one, and it's realizing, wow, there's a lot of pieces to this. So if I can just give a couple of the pieces, like to me, we all have this natural desire to connect with mom and dad, to be validated by mom and dad, to have a relationship that's meaningful with mom and dad. And in complex trauma, we're conditioned that it's our fault if it's not happening, that we need to do something and change to become the kind of child they'd want a relationship with. So it always produces this false sense of hope. If I only try harder, but we're still chasing that deep longing for connection with mom and dad. And one of the hardest things to do is to realize and face the facts that doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to happen. Mom and dad will basically always be just like a casual acquaintance. They'll never be that deep, intimate friend, no matter what. And it's their stuff, not my stuff. But why we don't want to go there is it means we got to look at reality and then grieve. We don't have the parents that we want. We don't have the relationship that we long for, and it's never going to be. And that's a big loss. Like that is in the top layer. It's almost worse than if they died, to not have that relationship while they're alive. That we have to grieve. But there's also a false sense of guilt. We're kind of conditioned that we're obligated to them. We have to give them that respect and loyalty and be there for them no matter what they do. And so if we go to set a boundary when they're not extreme toxic, they're just a little bit, we start to feel guilty that we're being the bad, unappreciative child, that they've done so much for me and here's what I'm doing to them. And it just, all this false guilt comes up, and we don't like that false guilt. So it's much easier to conform to their expectations than what is best. And so that grief, that false guilt piece, combined with that ongoing longing and hope that maybe I could have a relationship with them, those just are powerful things. And really what I want people to see is you're in your limbic brain again. You're in your emotional brain thinking, oh, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling guilty, I'm feeling this longing, this hope, this fantasy, whatever. Look at the facts. Get into your cortex brain. Here's the evidence. It's not going to happen. Doesn't mean you're going to kick them to the curb. You can still have them. So when my wife went through this with her mom and dad, she went through couple of years of grieving, but it took her about 10 years to get to the point where she finally accepted they're never going to be the parents I long for them to be, and I'm never going to have the relationship that I long to have with them. Basically, they're going to be like an acquaintance. I can go and I can talk about certain topics that are very superficial, but I can't talk about this topic. I can't talk about this topic. I can't open up about my needs and my deep internal world because they're just not interested. It's not going to happen. So when she finally accepted that, she went through a grieving time, but then she said, I'd rather have them as a casual acquaintance than not at all. So I am going to just accept that this is the relationship I have. It's never going to satisfy me as much as I hoped it would, but it's better than not having a relationship. So I will work at that. But I'm going to have to set some boundaries with them about some things because they can get disrespectful. They can take shots at me because I'm not being the daughter they want me to be, because I'm growing beyond their old dynamics. And so she had to stop kind of that people-pleasing, perfect little daughter girl role that she had always had. And so there was some tough decisions that she had to make. But in the end, it really, I think I was super proud of her because she grew through it and she ended up with a decent relationship with her mom and dad. But she used to talk to them like every day on the phone. That went to once a month. Then she used to visit them regularly. That went to once a month or once every 2 months. She just had to say, I can't be spending as much time. I can't be trying to engage them and trying to create this relationship that's not going to happen. I just have to redirect my energy to other relationships, because as long as I'm putting energy into trying to create this relationship, I'm actually hurting myself from building surrogate family type of relationships. So again, A lot of factors, but there is the natural tendency, I think, in all of us, which is if I just avoid it, maybe it'll go away. Maybe it'll fix itself.
My parents aren't even the same people anymore,
Exactly.
because of what alcoholism has done to their brain. I would say that like I don't put up with it, like if there's shots thrown at me, that's part of it too, is like, even though they're absolutely nuts and their brains have changed, we all kind of know what the deal is though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they kind of know what's up, there's no denying like that they're alcoholics. And that's also the kind of the weird thing too, is that like, we've all been kind of in the know the whole time, you know?
Yeah. So what my wife went through with her parents is like, there was no denial on that level. Yeah, we're screwed up. We've done this to you, blah, blah, blah. But as soon as she wanted to talk about her childhood and about kind of her dad as a narcissist and different things that happened, nope, not talking about that. Nope, not going there. And it was like, ooh, now we just hit this whole new level of denial when it gets to what the real issues are. So you're actually willing to talk about the symptoms of the real issues, but you're not really willing to look at the real issues. And when she realized that there was just a total unwillingness to go there, and she tried over and over again to get them to look at complex trauma, to talk about childhood stuff. Nope, not going there. Then it was okay. What do I do?
It's almost like the reverse with my parents. It's more so like what I've experienced the past 10 years. Like my mom sent me a text the other day, like, can you ever forgive me? And I know that it's about my childhood. And
Right.
it's like, I want more so of an acknowledgement of, and I'll never get it, right? But it's like what my experience has been over the past 10 years watching both of my parents. But also like, let's also like bring to mind that like their daughter also too has a podcast that's about adult children of alcoholics. Like I can't imagine the level of, and it's drowned out through substances, but like the shame
Yeah.
that they must experience.
Yeah. So what I've seen repeatedly with people, parents that say, can you ever forgive me for all my drinking when you were a kid? And to me, what they're apologizing for is, again, they're only apologizing for the symptoms.
Exactly.
They're not apologizing and being willing to change the real underlying issues. And so after a while, that's almost an empty apology, because I'm not seeing any true deep change in you that would make me say, yeah, you're truly sorry for what happened. And so the words almost become empty after a while.
Yeah, and it felt like it was more so coming from a place of she's dealing with a lot of guilt and shame, but I'm able to have a lot of compassion for her. I realize I see the wounds that she's never been able to resolve, and a lot of them have been passed on to me. And so it's really this balancing act of like, I'm so angry. I'm so pissed off at them for the way that they've treated me and for what I've gone through and the way that they've been unable to show up for me as parents. And then there's another part of me that feels a lot of compassion and sadness for what they're experiencing. They're very sick people.
Yeah. And I think, to me, one of the key things, and we'll end with this, but it's a key thing for people in recovery, is we have to learn to carry different emotions in our heart that we just don't instantly resolve. Some we can resolve, but there's the pain that my parents aren't going to love me the way I long to be loved. That's an ongoing thing that gets triggered periodically, causes anger, causes hurt. And I just learned to live with it and manage it and be compassionate to them, to myself, to grow through it. But it's not just going to go away. It's part of the package I've been given to carry. And I just have to learn how to say that's life. That doesn't mean I'm failing. It doesn't mean it's all bad. This is just the ongoing journey, part of my journey. So
That's life. Thank you. This has been really wonderful and quite an honor. And I'm just so grateful for the opportunity and to chat with both of you.
Well,
Both of you gentlemen, Andy, Tim.
It's been wonderful to have you, Andrea. But
I'm not gonna misname you at the end. I, I've enjoyed this conversation. I love your inner voice and how it comes out. It's really like bold and strong and passionate, and you're willing to deal with like the complexity. I was wondering if you'd be willing to just leave our listeners um, with any words of encouragement, or
This journey's messy. This healing work is really messy, And I think that's the biggest part is like you're not going to feel like you're as far as you want to be, and your life doesn't look the way that you thought it would, or you should be further along in your healing journey. I think that's like one of the biggest things that we struggle with. And it's like, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. And there is no timetable for this. And unfortunately, I think it just takes a lot longer than the way than we wish it would. But it's really just the biggest thing for me has just been embracing it all, just really embracing it all. And there hasn't been a single period in my life, a single struggle where in hindsight, it's not perfectly clear why it was supposed to happen exactly the way that it was supposed to, and that gives me a lot of hope and courage whenever I am going through something that, that's going to be my experience in the future too. It's going to become crystal clear exactly why it was supposed to happen the way that it is. And I truly believe that our pain is our biggest blessing. It has been for me. The only way that I've grown is through excruciating amounts of pain. So if you're in that place right now, I can just tell you like wholeheartedly that it's serving great purpose. And I think you will feel very grateful for it one day. So
it's really powerful. And we talked about your podcast and your community. Are there other projects you're working on, and where can
no, just
people
me, just my life, just, the project known as me.
and where can people find you online?
You can find, so I'm Adult Child Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and then my podcast is Adult Child. You can find it anywhere. And then my website is adultchildpodcast.com /shit shows for the community. So
Awesome.
I'll hop aboard this hot mess of a ship.
I love that.
Mm.
Andrea and Tim, thank you both for being here and for this rich, powerful conversation. And Andrea, we're so grateful for the work that you're doing, and then also just this realness and authenticity that you bring. Thanks for
I
sharing
don't know any other way.
I'm glad that you
Thank
were
you,
able to
guys.
share your pain and your progress with us, and also the courage that you show. And to everyone listening, remember that you're not broken, you're not alone. Your past doesn't have to define your future. Thanks for spending this time with us today.
Toodaloo.
Thank you for joining us on the Time with Tim podcast. If you'd like to share your own experiences or have questions, feel free to email us at podcasts@timfletcher.ca. Want to learn more about complex trauma? Subscribe to Tim Fletcher's YouTube channel for past lectures and his Friday night Tim Talks. You can also connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Looking for more support? We offer programs and courses to help with healing complex trauma and recovering from addictions. Visit timfletcher.ca to learn more or send us an inquiry. We're here to support you. Until we meet again, take care, and thank you for letting us be a part of your healing journey.